This is Atomic Heart. We're here on Xbox Series X. Be sure to like the video. Subscribing is great as well. So what are we getting here? It's a dynamic 4K resolution at 60 FPS. And you know what? It actually does quite keep to that high level of visual fidelity. And the performance is basically rock solid the whole time through. I did notice that there are a couple of crashes that are present towards some of the more stuffed environments. If you're going into a saved room and trying to leave it, it will crash the game, which is a bit disappointing because, well, the game does take a very long time to load, which is odd because, you know, it is a current-gen title, right? Anyways, let's dive in and let's talk about this very, very intriguing and very, very different sort of game. So it's basically a Russian utopia where, you know, one of those retro future games where kind of like, hey, you know, they were able to get everything going, communism's great, everybody's having a great time. But of course, the selfish acts of some individuals create a situation where, well, things don't exactly go well, and it becomes a hellish situation, I guess you would put it in the most mild of terms. It gets a little messy. So this is a game that I really would describe as tedious. It's a very, very tedious game. Now, if you decided you want to jump here and play it, I would highly recommend playing it on the easy difficulty, as while that sounds easy, this game is a grind. It is a very, very tedious grind that is just full of way too many enemies and annoying things. It's weird, because like when the game opens up, the first like half hour to hour of gameplay is just excellent. It's fun, it's engaging, it's cool, it's this beautiful interactive environment where you get to like, you know, just do all these weird things. Like I was eating ice cream and I was enjoying the fruits of the, you know, the Soviet era, and it was just absolutely a delightful kind of opening sequence. I really did like it. And then from there, you're dealing with this protagonist that is, I don't know if he's really likable. I was okay with the dialogue, but then after a while, crispy critters, it's just really, really gets on your nerves. And that's a lot of the game, is it's just tedious room after tedious room of fetch quests. Hey, we need you to go and collect body parts. Hey, we need you to go around and collect this or grab this capsule. And you spend a lot of times in similar areas. One thing I will definitely give the game credit for is it's got a good amount of length to it. It's gonna be like at least 12 hours. And you know what? That in itself is kind of impressive. But if you're like me and you're just sitting there being like, I'm sick and tired of this, it's gonna be a slog. And it can get a lot longer too, because this game really wasn't sure what it wanted to be. At times, it's a very linear Bioshock-esque game. Like, seriously, I was like, oh my god, we got a new Bioshock here. Is this like Bioshock Infinite? What? When it was opening, and then I was like, no, it's not. And, yeah, it's kind of wild seeing this sort of, like, change between something I was so excited for and then kind of just being like, I want this experience to end as soon as possible. And that is just, like, utterly fascinating that that was the case here. Just utterly fascinating indeed. So yeah, it's a game filled with so many weird moments. Moments that really don't match together. Like, in terms of narrative, dialogue, delivery, or in terms of gameplay. Because it's like, the first few hours or so, it's just really, really linear, and you're just kind of walking around grabbing canisters. And then, like, randomly it's an open world, and then, like, it's linear again, and it's like the open world doesn't really encourage you to explore it, because you're constantly using more resources, and insufficient resources is a word that I would highly use alongside tedious in this game. Oh, do I love having insufficient resources to do anything. Oh, yes, I do. And, you know, you can loot, and you can find stuff, and just, like, I never felt like I actually had enough resources to do the things I wanted to do or upgrade the weapons I wanted, and it felt like a really tedious, slow sort of time. And don't worry, there's a lot more to talk about in this game. Oh, there is quite a lot to this one to go over. I'll first briefly mention there's no New Game Plus, and your saves only go back so far, so we're actually showing off a pretty late part of the game. But don't worry, the way narrative and dialogue is delivered is so, like, minimal in this one that you're not really going to, like, you know, you're not going to be spoiled by anything. It's just, yeah, and there are some collectibles, like audio things you can gather, which is kind of neat. But yeah, it's just, it's truly, truly weird. We're actually supposed to, that's funny, we went up this way. That's hilarious. It's truly, truly just this cumbersome, tedious, boring slog of a game where you're just constantly overwhelmed by enemies because of the way the combat is handled. But we'll get to that too. I'm sorry, there is a lot to talk about with this one. So no New Game Plus, no level select. You can either start a new one. You don't have many saves you can go back to. So I was kind of like really just stuck with this, and I was like, okay, well, this shows off some weapons, this shows off some stuff. Cool. And that's kind of what we're going towards. So going back to what I was talking about, the game is like linear, and then it's open, and then there's weird parkour stuff, and then like strangely a lot of the game is based around doing puzzles. Puzzles on doors, puzzles on locks, puzzles within the environment. Some of these puzzles, cool. A lot of these puzzles, wow, I'm just kind of tired of this. But you know what? There were, to be fair, a variety of different puzzling experiences. Like, you know, you were constantly given something new to solve. So the variation there, I think, is pretty well done. Yeah, so, like I was saying, there's things I like, but there's a lot that I did not like in this one. And that really boils down to that combat element of play. Ugh, jeez. Anyways. It was so neat kind of exploring these environments, though. And it's like, it really does feel BioShock-esque in terms of, like, the look of it. But even more gruesome and messed up. I kind of thought we had ray tracing going on, but I guess not, which is a little disappointing. But nah, I was kind of realizing that as I got later in the game where some surfaces weren't reflecting. But man, the screen space stuff, very, very well done in this one. Very, very well done. Just something I wanted to put out there. But yeah, it feels like this weird mismatch, long, lengthy game that just kind of like never kind of ends. And it's weird. If the combat would have been a little bit more interesting, I actually would have really loved to explore this game more. But man, you get so tired of it, especially with like some of the puzzles that really don't have a lot of focus to them. Like you're kind of standing in a room, and you could tell that the developers didn't really know how to like do the exposition in the game. So it's kind of a lot of you're standing there doing a really slow, boring puzzle while your character talks to his hand thing. And then there's like elements where there was literally one part of the game where your AI pal's like, I'm gonna work on this door, you know, is there anything you need to go over, blah blah blah, and your character stands there talking to his hand, and it goes like on and on for like a good 3 minutes or so, which feels like an eternity if you are, you know, someone sitting there kind of waiting for the next part of the game. And you literally, you just stand there. And there's a few segments where you're just kind of like, the dialogue delivery is so bizarre and weird. And I really didn't quite understand why they did it in that way. It's like they had more story to tell, but they couldn't come up with a creative way to deliver it within the game, which is so bizarre. And then you've got the dialogue, like I mentioned, with this like really, really annoying lead character, and the glove is so annoying too, and it's like, okay, and then some of the other characters are just wild, wacky, which makes sense considering, you know, the type of world that we're dealing with right now. But yeah, there's a lot of like really perplexing elements to this game, because I think if they would have gotten that combat right, this actually would have been like a really almost perfect sort of experience. I also don't think they land really the conclusive elements of this game, but that's, you know, not something I'm really going to be talking about too much in a review, of course, right? I don't think they stuck the landing when everything kind of came together. But it's really neat, and the game is at its best when you're discovering weird things, when you are, like, fighting gruesome creatures, when you are exploring these places trying to figure out what's going on, who do you trust, who are these people, what's really happening in this world. And yeah, it's just this really bizarre mismatch where I'm like, oh, I really like this part, but man, do I hate this part. So let's talk about the combat. So it's a game where, again, tedious is the word I would use to describe the entire experience. Just a tedious grind fest, and this is easy difficulty right now, where I played most of it, almost all of it on normal too, where you fight a robot, and the robots are chunky. There's no like, oh, this robot is like easier than this robot. They all take a ton of hits, and they all are like, every single one of them is like this tiring nightmare to fight, and you'll get these rooms where you're in tiny little spaces having to fend off against like wave after never-ending wave of these monstrosities. And that's again where I come to saying maybe the easy mode would be the fun way to kind of play it, as it's still, as you can tell, kind of a pain, but it's a little bit more bearable, and it's so weird how freaking difficult this game is for no real reason. It just felt like a grindy time where I'm like constantly knocked on my back, not to mention constantly lacking the resources to actually get tools and weapons to actually feel like I could deal with these two of these things, deal with the stuff that was fighting me. I constantly was like, oh, I'm not equipped for these scenes or what's going on, and I kept trying to scavenge, and I don't know, maybe the open world stuff is even more in depth and you're supposed to dive into that. I don't know. And there were some scenes where things didn't work properly, you know, some sequences that didn't quite properly work, and you'd have to reload like a save point or something, and there's a lot to this game where I'm just kind of like, I really just did not enjoy playing this at all. I actually really think this is an awful, tedious experience that I was just really wanting it to be over. And it sucks in that sense because I really liked the opening of this game. There's a lot of little things I kind of really like about this game here or there, but ultimately that combat is just so obnoxious to the point where I was just drained and bored, mostly bored. Especially puzzle sequences where you have to spend like, I don't know, like an odd hour and a half just kind of going through these repetitive, meandering puzzles that don't really intrigue or challenge, and you're just like, oh. And then the checkpoint system is just absolutely atrocious in this. Like, you'll be sitting there and like, sometimes you get 4 or 5 checkpoints right after each other, and then sometimes you don't get any checkpoints for like 20 or 30 minutes having to do like a really boring sequence over and over and over again. Like, sometimes it autosaves, sometimes it doesn't, and sometimes it'll save you, like, let's say there's a boss fight coming up, and it's like, okay, you're in front of this boss fight, very obvious it's going to be a boss fight. Here's a machine where you can get, like, ammo and health. So when you die, instead of spawning you in front of this machine, the game, like, forces you to just, like, you just refight the boss. And it's like, what? Why? Why wouldn't you just spawn me right there so I can go get the resources I need in case I was, like, ill-equipped for this battle? It's just bizarre. Like, it really, really was just, like, sometimes so perplexingly bad in that setup. And you're, like, never given, like I said, loot or resources you need. And that includes, like, health. Oh, it's so rare, and I can't believe I actually got health just as I'm talking here. It is so rare to actually come across health stuff. You, like, never come across ammo. No, siree. Like, you basically have to just kind of hope that you, like, you know, come across this sort of thing. And that in itself is just tiring. A lot of this game is just kind of like, I really just want this to end because I'm so tired of playing it. Which is a shame because, like, it looks so visually good. Like, it looks like a really true current gen sort of game. And then you're just sort of, like, wishing it to be over, which is a shame. Because there's so many, like, neat standout moments. creepy places. I love the messed up ladies that are so friendly and talk to you, they're like these robot ladies. And they're like, you know, these really friendly beings, that yet they're like well aware of the craziness that's happening. And then all the other robots are just trying to like rip you apart. And you know, it's such a weird mismatch of me being like, I really want to like you, but I was sitting there in frustration for like hours and hours being like, is my punishment almost over? Will this finally ever end? What is going on here? And then it just like, it feels like the conclusion of this was so lackluster and disappointing that I'm like, this is just terrible and awful. Like I said, I hated this game. I hated playing this game. It was a terrible, terrible time. That felt like such a grind. To a degree, I didn't even really understand why it was so bad. So you can kind of tie these things together, and you can sort of get an idea of like the problems I have with it. Because, you know, I really did want to like this. I really can sit there and pick out like a thing here or there where I'm like, well, this is kind of cool, or this is kind of neat. And then like, by the end of it, you're just kind of like, oh, I'm glad that was over, let's get rid of this, never touch it again. It's so weird. It goes from this really cool opening utopian thing where I'm like, wow, this world's so magnificent, this game's so fun, oh, this is so crazy, and then it just sort of slows down, and it goes slow and slow and slow and slower, and then, you know, just like boring puzzles, and then boring combat that just drags on and on. I think if you balance out the enemies you fight, make them a little bit easier to kill, you know, you don't have to necessarily decrease the quantity of them, but just make them not such a pain to battle and take out and, you know, remove from the area. Then you have something that's kind of compelling, because you can enjoy the mystery elements of the game a bit more. And even, again, on easy difficulty, it at times feels insanely overwhelming. And shooters are kind of like my bread and butter. I don't struggle with shooter games. But wow, this one just really, really tested my nerve to the highest degree. And I just don't know why it needed to be like that. It really, really doesn't make any sense as to why they did that kind of thing, what the focus was there. They do have some neat upgrading things, some neat crafting stuff. You can get different supplies, which are cool. But you never feel like you're getting ahead with the tools you have or the weapons you have access to. And you just really, really get exhausted and tired by it, with, again, an element of just it being tedious. And they just throw puzzle after puzzle after puzzle at you, repetitive door sequences. Just, like, basically they would put locks on, like, every door, so that you're, like, never able to actually, like, get through sequences fast. You have to sit there and, like, take out enemies, and it's just, it's so odd. Because, like, the character design is really cool. Like, these robots, they look absolutely excellent. They really do. I love the different, like, designs of the different robotic monsters that you're having to take out, and even the poly stuff is so creepy looking, and the world is so detailed, and every room is stuffed with, like, you know, these different, like, little things going on, trying to tell its own little tales. And the, you know, the open world concept's neat, but I didn't want to explore any of it because I was so just tired of dealing with all this other stuff, and I felt like I wouldn't get rewarded by going out there and exploring and taking it in. So it's just this weird mismatch of things where I'm like, maybe if you play this on easy difficulty, you might be able to have some fun. I don't know. For me, it was just tiring and exhausting. And by the end of it, I just really don't want to experience it more. So I'm kind of excited that my journey with this game is coming to an end soon. Which is a shame. Because, like I said so many times before, they've got something neat going on here. They've got something interesting going on here. But it just wasn't fun to play. It wasn't enjoying for me. It wasn't engaging. I was just tired of it. It felt obnoxious. It felt overbearing. It felt unsettling. There were numerous problems throughout my experience that hampered the enjoyment of it. And I felt like I was just doing a fetch quest as this really obnoxious, annoying individual that just really wouldn't ever shut up at all. And yeah, that's kind of it. The Atomic Heart was just ultimately a really tiring, disappointing mess of a game that could have been so much more. So much more.